we look at these Heisman predictions, we look at who's going to have a big year, and it's like we don't know anything. Now, I think Jayden Daniels, I think folks understood that he was going to take a leap from year 1 to year 2, starting in LSU's offense. I don't know that, like Joe Burrow in 2019, I don't know that was as big of an expectation. I think those of us who talked to folks at LSU knew that the Joe Brady influence on the offense was going to make it better. I don't think anybody in their wildest dreams thought they would be as dominant as they were. So that jump is what Travis is asking about. He says, in the past, we've seen transfer QBs make big jumps in their second season as a starter. Not asking for a Jayden Daniels level leap, but do you see any QBs under the radar poised to lead their teams to a jump in the win column? And Travis says his pick is Kyron Drones at Virginia Tech, which I think is a great choice because remember, I went to ACC spring meetings and everybody told me watch out for Virginia Tech. Coaches, media who cover the league really closely. Everybody says, watch out for these guys. This could be a 9 or 10 win team this year. This is a team that could potentially insert itself into the ACC title race. And Kyron Drones is a big reason behind that. And I remember seeing Kyron Drones at a Baylor practice when he was younger and thinking, this dude's got some arm talent. We know he's a good athlete. And I think with the Virginia Tech last year, Brent Pry, he kind of figured some stuff out in terms of what he wants this team to be as the season went on. Tyler Bowman, their offensive coordinator, remember, was a first-time play caller the season before, was working with Kyron Drones for the first time last season. It seemed like about midway through the season, they found their groove together. Now, Kyron Drones needs to be more efficient, and because he had games where he was remarkably efficient and games where you're averaging like 3.4 yards per attempt, which you cannot have. So needs to be more consistent, more efficient. But I think with a whole off season where everybody kind of understands, here's what the offense is, here's what Kyron does well, I think he could definitely be one of those guys. But I made a list. There's a lot of guys who fit this category. And like I said earlier in the show, remember, the top 3 Heisman vote getters last year were second-year transfer quarterbacks. It's become, I don't know if it's the surest thing in college football, but we can break down the why of it, I think, because a lot of times a guy will transfer with eligibility to remain in quarterback. He doesn't win the job. He transfers somewhere else. Okay, we usually don't hear from those people again, but usually when they win the job and become beloved, like I'm thinking Hendon Hooker here, who, by the way, didn't initially win the job at Tennessee, but was clearly the starter going into 2022. When they get that spot, they're not giving it up. They're old at that point for the most part. They're usually like a fourth-year player by that point. So there's some leadership qualities that they've developed. They tend to appreciate where they are because they've been at a place where they weren't happy or where things weren't working out for them. Like, it's a good situation to be that second-year transfer starting quarterback. It means you found your spot. It means you landed in the right place. And, I look at this list of guys and you see some people who, like, we're going to talk about Haynes King at Georgia Tech and Graham Mertz at Florida. Those were guys who their first stop, it did not work out very well. Like, they left and the fan bases at those places are like, man, they just weren't as good as their recruiting hype suggested. And then both of them get to a new place and you see, oh, they are pretty good. Maybe it was just a bad fit. But this list is pretty interesting. I'll start with the guy who obviously has the highest draft hype right now, the one who gets talked about the most probably. And it's interesting because I'm not sure most people would put him on this list because he was following a coach to where he went. It's sort of like the Caleb Williams situation where he followed Lincoln Riley to USC, so that when he was a first-year starter at USC, it wasn't like being a first-year starter. It was like being a second-year starter in Lincoln Riley's offense, which is what he was, and he won the Heisman that year. But in this particular case, Shedeur Sanders definitely does belong on this list. Yes, he followed the coach, his dad, from Jackson State to Colorado, but Deion Sanders doesn't call offensive plays, and they didn't run the same offense at Colorado that they ran at Jackson State. They hired Sean Lewis, who'd been the head coach at Kent State, who runs the veer and shoot that came out of Baylor, that Tennessee runs now, that Ole Miss runs now, that Jeff Lebby's going to run at Mississippi State. They ran that offense. And then Deion panicked late in the season, demoted Sean Lewis, who went on to become head coach at San Diego State this offseason. And Deion installed Pat Shurmur, who called their offense for the rest of the year. But then this offseason has revamped that offense into something that is closer to what he would like to run. And Pat Shurmur, former NFL offensive coordinator. So it's going to look really different at Colorado this year. So Shedeur was very accurate last year. He completed 69.3% of his passes. What can he do better? He can be more efficient. He averaged 7.5 yards an attempt. The best quarterbacks in college football tend to average over 9. And, like Jayden Daniels last year averaged 11.7. Bo Nix, who everybody said was in a dink and dunk offense, he averaged 9.6 yards every time he threw the ball. You'll take that all day. So Shedeur needs to get more efficient. Now, part of the reason why he wasn't efficient is out of his control and needs to be fixed. We'll find out. They've worked in the transfer portal to hopefully fix it. But Colorado gave up 56 sacks last year. You got to cut that number by about 25 to get down to the national average. So this is a guy who's just getting blasted on a lot of plays last year. He's got to get rid of the ball. That's one part of it. But his offensive line needs to do a better job. If they do, I think you're going to see those efficiency numbers rise, and you could see a big year out of Shedeur Sanders. He's got talent on the outside. He's got Travis Hunter playing receiver, also corner. He's got Horn. He's got players he can throw to. So this will be really interesting to watch because that offensive line is better. He could be one of the best quarterbacks in the country. Another guy I just mentioned who basically reinvented himself, Haynes King at Georgia Tech. So Haynes King was a top 10 quarterback recruit in the class of 2020. Everybody at A&M just raved about his athletic ability, but he gets in for Texas A&M and never really puts it all together. And I will go back to something Aaron Murray told me, the former Georgia quarterback, about what Jimbo Fisher required of his quarterbacks. And it's something Aaron said. This was years before Jimbo got fired, but it always stuck with me, and I couldn't unsee it when I was watching Texas A&M games. Jimbo wanted his quarterbacks kind of holding the ball up by their ear when they were moving around in the pocket. And it's a very robotic kind of motion. It's something that the quarterbacks used to have to do in the 90s and the early 2000s. But as the game evolved, as defensive linemen got faster, as quarterbacks ran more as part of the offense, you saw that changed. The ball security still matters, and being in a good position to throw still matters, but the way quarterbacks got taught changed to allow them to move a little more naturally. Well, Haynes King goes to Georgia Tech, where he's working with Chris Weinke, who won the Heisman Trophy at Florida State, and Buster Faulkner, who's the offensive coordinator there. And it looks like they kind of let him be the athlete he is there. And that's important because it's why he looked like a different player last year than he looked like at Texas A&M. Now, King's rushing numbers make it where he doesn't have to just blow it out in the passing game. He ran for 737 yards. He had a 6.1 per carry average. And remember, they back out sacks from your per carry average in college. So he was gaining a lot of yards when he ran the ball. He had 10 rushing touchdowns. So he's right there with Shedeur Sanders in the average per attempt in the passing game. So he's at 7.7. If he can pop that up to like 8.5, 9 with the same running ability, you're talking about a guy who's in the Heisman race. You're talking about a guy who's going to put up crazy numbers. Now, the one number he's got to change. He had 16 interceptions last year. He's got to drop that number because, you probably need to cut that in half. Single-digit interceptions, the goal here. But if you can run the way he runs and get a little bit more efficient in the passing game, stop throwing the ball to the other team. It could be a big year for Haynes King. Now, we discussed Georgia Tech's schedule. It is brutal. Hardest schedule in the ACC, plus in the non-conference, they have to play Georgia. And they have to play Notre Dame. That said, I'm excited to see Haynes King. I'm excited to see what he can do. We're going to see him in Ireland against Florida State's defense right off the bat. That's a very good defense. The last time we saw Florida State's defense as its full version, it was shutting Louisville down completely in the ACC title game. Now, the names have changed somewhat, but I suspect it's still going to be very, very salty. So Haynes King has his work cut out for him at the beginning of the season. Graham Mertz, another guy I just mentioned. He's at Florida and completed 73% of his passes last year. Graham Mertz was not the problem at Florida last year. Florida's defense was the bigger problem. Mertz was excellent. And, it's telling about how good Mertz was, how much he earned the respect of his teammates, coaches, that as excited as everybody is for DJ Lagway, nobody is saying start DJ Lagway now except Shannon Crowder, who I think he's saying that for fun more than anything else. But Mertz feels like the guy you want if you're bringing DJ Lagway along. It's sort of the same situation like Nico was talking about earlier, where he wants to kind of learn and sit for a year and then be ready to roll when he comes in. Mertz would be the guy to learn from. Now, remember, Mertz's season last year ended at Missouri when he was dump trucking some dude trying to get extra yards in a really tight game, broke his collarbone. So this is a guy who is not afraid to put his shoulder down. And if he does, you got to be a little bit careful, because then you may have DJ Lagway starting. But Mertz, what his job will be, develop new targets. Eugene Wilson III, obviously, they're very excited about. They want to make sure he gets touches. But you lost a first rounder in Ricky Pearsall. Got to figure out that second option situation. Maybe it's Elijah Badger, who's another transfer from Arizona State, like Ricky Pearsall was. Also, Arliss Boardingham at tight end. Do you get him more involved? That's what Mertz has got to do. He can't control if Florida's defenses any better, but my guess is he's going to be fine. So he's going to have potentially a good year. A guy who, if he makes this leap, his team's going to be. We talked about this yesterday. We talked about this with Phillip Dukes the Scoop, Payton Thorne at Auburn. And Dukes thinks that if things go right for Auburn, you're talking about maybe a 9-win team in Hugh Freeze's second year. That is going to take a big improvement from Payton Thorne. Now, Payton Thorne is a very good runner. And then when they utilized that last year, I feel like they were better offensively. But Payton Thorne also had to deal with a lot of drops from his receivers. They should be better this year. The receiving core at Auburn, you add Keandre Lambert-Smith from Penn State, Cam Coleman, the freshman, everybody's pumped about. I think the situation around Payton Thorne has gotten a lot better, which should allow him to make a big jump. Again, we've talked about this a bunch, but Hugh Freeze taking over the offensive play calling from Philip Montgomery. Hugh Freeze had been the offensive coordinator, the play caller, wherever he'd been, even though he'd been the head coach. Last year, he gets to Auburn. He says, I want to deal with all the CEO stuff. I would like somebody else to run the offense. He hires Philip Montgomery. Halfway through the season, Hugh Freeze is like, what have I done? I'm much more comfortable running my own offense. So I think Payton Thorne could be better just because of all that stuff around him. So if he makes a jump, expect Auburn to make a jump. I got two more that you may not have thought about. One, because he's so freaking old. Like, it's amazing that he's still in college. And I actually think he could be in college next year, too. Alan Bowman at Oklahoma State. Alan Bowman, as a freshman, was the starting quarterback at Texas Tech for Coach Cliff Kingsbury, who has since been the Arizona Cardinals head coach, a USC analyst, and is now the Washington Commanders offensive coordinator. Alan Bowman played for him. Then he was at Michigan. He wins the job at Oklahoma State last year. Oklahoma State doesn't figure out really what it is offensively till they get Ollie Gordon going in like game 4. So now they know exactly what they are. They've got this old offensive line. Bowman's got to be more efficient. He only averaged 6.9 yards per attempt. His touchdown to interception ratio is 15-14. Like we said with Haynes King, that's got to get better. But if you know what you're doing, if you know what you're up to, I think that helps. They understand what their offense is. Ollie Gordon's going to be the cornerstone of that offense. Alan Bowman needs to win the boxes heavy, be able to just complete passes, hope for one-on-one stuff, let the receivers work. If Alan Bowman makes a jump, you may be talking about the Big 12 champs at Oklahoma State. We now move to the Big 10. And this is another, like, I don't know, this guy, it's hard because all these other guys had basically a full season as the starter. This guy is not, because he got hurt in camp. He was slow. He wasn't really himself when he was playing. And then he tore his ACL in Game 5. That's Cade McNamara at Iowa. Remember, Cade McNamara was the starting quarterback for Michigan when they won the Big 10 in 2022. Took him to the playoff. Now, J.J. McCarthy took over for him last year and wound up becoming a first-rounder. But Cade McNamara is an effective quarterback, has proven to be an effective quarterback in the Big 10. So let's just imagine you get a fully healthy Cade McNamara, new offensive coordinator in Tim Lester. Luke Lachey's back healthy, your biggest weapon at tight end. Your offensive line's a little bit better. You see where I'm going with this? We may not be making the Iowa offense jokes. We might have to stop. For Cade McNamara's sake, I hope that's what happens. I think that would be quite a story for him to come roaring back from injury and be the guy who turns Iowa's offense around. Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples on 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.